Let's talk about software architecture documentation. So this is an activity which you only need to do for class B and C software. So if you're class A, just skip this video and do something productive with your life. Nice. However, if you're class B or C, you're stuck with me. That rhymes. Anyway, how does architecture documentation typically look like, and how do you fulfill the regulatory requirements for that? A lot of that has changed, not the regulatory requirements, but our approach to that. When I last recorded my videos, our approach was slightly different, where we would create a real architecture diagram. I'll show you how that looks in a bit. Nowadays, we mostly do it in formwork and actually create a document which is faster, and it's faster to change too if your architecture changes. So there are a lot of benefits to this, and we've done this with probably 200 consulting clients now, definitely more than 100 when I last counted 2 years ago. So you could be like client number 201 who still wants to do architecture diagram instead. I guess you could do that, but it's not the fastest and not the most efficient approach. I'll show you both, and then it's kind of up to you what to do. Anyway, how does an architecture documentation typically looks like? I opened up this. This is the German COVID app, so that was like contact tracing during the COVID situation, and it has a GitHub repository with some architecture documentation in there. It kind of got super complex over time, but yeah, you have diagrams like this. So long story short, what you have is you have some documents. They describe stuff in human language. Oh my god, what is this? And then you have you have a high-level document which describes the overall architecture, and this is probably this one which fulfills that purpose the best. So you have in this case, you have a backend in blue, which runs on the, by the way, super terrible telecom cloud and super overpriced too. And then you have a mobile app which runs on, in this case, Apple iOS and Android in gray, and then some stuff in between, and that's generally a good architecture diagram. So in the past, we would kind of say, hey, create a similar architecture diagram for your system. And in our example of the depression app, we might have a backend which runs here, which might have different servers or services or whatever, and which hopefully doesn't run on the telecom cloud. And then you would maybe have a mobile app, and which would also be a separate box here, and you could kind of go a bit more in detail what those things do and what sort of data maybe gets sent back and forth. So that's what you could do. However, the drawback of diagrams is it's always kind of cumbersome to update them. You need some sort of tool to create them. You can do it in Google Docs, for example, and then you have to save it to your documentation in formwork, to your record section here. Here. You would need to create a new record here and then save that as an attachment, and it's all super clunky because every time you change it, you have to delete the old attachment, make the changes in the image, upload the new attachment, and it just sucks in many ways. So what we nowadays do is we kind of keep the same content but put it in a document. So if you go to our 62304 templates on the website, search for architecture, you'll find two templates. One is the description, one is the checklist. The description is kind of more important. And then here, essentially what you have, it's literally the same content, but it's just text. So what you have to do is you have to describe software systems, and you have maybe here a front end and a back end. And again, this is what we call front end here. One section here is literally one box here. So this could be the back end box, or you can name it however you want. And then this is another, this box would be another section in this document, maybe here. So as many systems as you have, you describe the specs here. And we kind of in the explanatory text, we tell you what what's the minimum stuff of documentation you need to add here. So what's the runtime it runs on? How do you deploy it? Who are the people using it? Oh, by the way, what's the user groups? Is it the Unix? Anyway, add something about user groups, and what's its software safety classification. So if you have a particularly nitpicky auditor, one of the 62304 requirements is that you actually come up with a safety classification for each of your systems. So you could have a different safety classification for your app, maybe class A, and a different one for your backend, maybe class B. Most of the time it's the other way around. Usually the user-facing thing is more risky than the backend thing. Anyway, then you just go further through this document. You have the different software systems. And then you have a concept which is called software units. The funny thing is no one really has a good definition of this, including the standard, because the 6304 defines it as a software item that cannot be subdivided into other items. But it's like, well, what does that mean? Is it like a line of code? Probably not. Is it like a repository? Maybe. Is it like a running service? Maybe. So it's kind of like up to you how you define units. So you could come up with like slightly more fine-grained units within the systems which you have here. Then you document a few other things. The database you're using, this should be fairly easy for you if you're a technical person. How you encrypt data, how you encrypt it at rest and in transit. And most of this is boilerplate. Again, feel free to use ChatGPT. Maybe we have a better ChatGPT integration which does this for you in the future. But yeah, this is a lot of it just like describing HTTPS, SSL, and other stuff you might be using. So one important note to tie in here is these software systems also have a second location where you document those, and that's in formwork. So in formwork, if you remember, in the software requirements section, you had this way of organizing things by grouping requirements into these things. And yes, they are called systems, actually, as you can see in the headline here. So the stuff you describe here is literally the stuff, they correspond to these entries here. So, oh, big revelation, actually formwork saves a lot of time here, because if you're doing it the old school way, you would have to copy this document to Google Docs or wherever, and then fill it out here with your systems. The formwork way is pretty cool because all this description stuff, which we have here, like this description, you can save that alongside this system. So I kind of like go to smartphone app here, edit, then you have a description field, and then here you go. And then you save it, and then that's part of your audit exports. When you export your software requirements, you have a separate sheet in the spreadsheet, which is your systems. So that's very cool. So formwork saves you a lot of time there again. So essentially all of this stuff is solved by formwork if you're using formwork, so you don't need to document this. However, all this other stuff, you actually do have to document. So, so formwork doesn't save you all of the time here, but a bit of it. So how would you do that again? I guess you can guess. You go to the QMS section, templates, technical documentation, and then architecture description, and then create a new record in our test app. Yeah, and then you could actually go ahead and delete this. Yeah, and then you have to rename the numbers. Yeah, I'm too lazy to do that now. And then you describe all the stuff here, save it, and you're done. So yeah, that's how the architecture works. And again, maybe as a quick side note, one big question always is like, how much of this do you do for being useful for your day-to-day development work? Like, do you really create this documentation to share this among developers? Or do you only do it for regulatory compliance? There are very different ways of seeing this and very different opinions there. Our opinion is a quite radical one, is that I would say for your internal purposes, for project management and communication with your developers, create whatever you want to create, which is the most useful for your development. But that might not be the right thing for regulatory compliance. For regulatory compliance, you have to create this. So I would advocate for you to create this for regulatory compliance. But the likelihood is super high that it's not super useful for your team internally. So go ahead and create other stuff which you might use for your internal purposes. One example, by the way, is like Swagger documentation. I think it's called Swagger, or it's maybe I'm this dinosaur. But what we did here for Udemy, which is this terrible European database for medical devices, is we created an unofficial API documentation. So you can go to this GitHub repository, and then you see like the API, and it's pretty cool. It's like a REST API, and it shows you like the schema of the request and the response. And this is pretty cool. However, this might be something you could use with your developers. You create some sort of like API documentation to be used internally. This is not necessarily something which you need for regulatory documentation. For regulatory documentation, you need these rather abstract things called software systems, software units, database, So yeah, I would say separate those two things, and but it's up to you. You could also kind of like try to combine them, but usually it ends up being a bit of a mess. Cool. All right, that's about architecture. Good luck with your architecture. See you in the next video.